Hi, you're watching the SMC Journal podcast. I'm Scott Moore, your host. This show is all about performance, whether that's web page, applications, servers, hardware, software, anything that has to do with performance testing, tuning, or monitoring in IT today. So if you want things to run faster, more efficiently, this is the show that you want to be watching. Today's show is about Google's Core Web Vitals. What are they? Where do they come from? And why do we care? And not just technical performance engineers. Why do we care? Why would marketing people care? Why would the average user who's just implementing their first website, how does it affect them on their Google score, on the ranking of the search page? So these are things we want to try to answer today. But before we do, and I've got a special guest I want to bring on, before we do that, I want to talk about the web page metrics that exist inside of all these web browsers that we know about today. So if you've never heard of W3C, that's the World Wide Web Consortium. If you go to w3.org, you'll find all this information about working groups that exist that companies have representatives and independent people that are part of these groups making decisions about standards that go on for technologies on the web. And it's not just web browsers, it can be about protocols. For example, the next version of HTTP that the browser uses, HTTP version 3 is being worked on right now. So, what decisions are being made about that? And we have security groups and all kinds of other groups. There's a specific group that we care about today on this show, which is the Web Performance Working Group. So that's at w3.org/webperf. And it tells you on this page what the mission of the Performance Working Group is, all the specifications they're working on, the different APIs that go into a web browser. Some of these are experimental and some of these are considered standard. So if a browser like Microsoft's browser, Google's browser, name your favorite one, Firefox, whoever, if they want to be considered compliant with the standards, they will probably look to the W3C and make sure they've implemented these specifications. So having said that, there are metrics from the W3C that are built into every browser that help developers look at these timings and the performance of them and say, okay, here's how we know how well we're doing just in terms of code execution or how long it takes for an image to render or style sheets to load or something like that, right? But sometimes a company as influential and large as Google, they go above and beyond this and start doing additional things, and such is the case for Google's Core Web Vitals. So if you look on web.dev, and by the way, all of these links that you see are going to be on the show notes, either on the YouTube show notes for the video or on smcjournal.com for this podcast. But this page basically tells you that these web vitals, these core web vitals, was an initiative by Google to provide some unified guidance around quality signals. Now, they don't say metrics, they say signals essential to delivering a great user experience. So really the difference here is not about just traditional metrics or API values. It's about how are users experiencing your site. So see, that would be very important for SEO and marketers to know. And as Google makes performance important, they have a real solid performance culture there. They're kind of nudging the industry to say, you need to take this as important as well, because it's going to affect your score. It's going to affect your ranking in our Google search engine. And they have obviously, arguably the most influential search engine out there in the world. So in order to kind of get more of a deeper dive into this as to what these are and why we care, I want to bring on my special guest today, who is Tim Verrecke from Akamai, and he can talk more about why these metrics are important. So let's do that now. Welcome to the show, Tim Verrecke. I know that's not pronouncing it right, but welcome to the SMC Journal podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
So why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm based out of Belgium, and I love everything related to web performance. In my day job at Akamai, I work as a web performance consultant. So I work with the largest e-commerce and the largest newspapers in the world to make their websites as fast as possible. And next to my day job at Akamai, in the evening when my wife falls asleep in front of the television, I pick my laptop and I work on the largest scale modeling website in the world, which has about 40,000 visitors a day. And I also use it as a testing tool to learn new performance techniques.
So in a sense, you're in the community full time, you should say. This is your personal and your work life and everything. So yeah, join the club. I'm right there with you. We're performance geeks, and I love it. I love it. So the reason why I want to talk to you today is because I sort of have, I wouldn't say they're separate cliques of friends, but there's definitely two segments where I talk about back end performance, and there's usually conversations around databases and servers and CPUs. And then there's a group that talks about front end performance. Now, both of them affect each other, but the front end people are talking about things like core web vitals and cache policies and things of that nature. So I would put you in that camp. Would you agree you're in that camp?
I'm actually, in my view, I'm actually in both camps. I love the front end part, but I also love the back end part, tuning MySQL to having memcached, etc., looking at the kernel settings. So I'm actually, in my view, in both camps.
Good.
If
So
that's
we welcome you with open arms to both. So, but specifically, an area where I wanted to dive in a little bit today is, you see a lot of marketing information around core web vitals, especially if you're dealing with SEO and maybe you're not a technical person, but you're a marketing person and you want your website to perform well. You do some searches and it won't take long. You're looking at these core web vitals of largest contentful paint, first input delay, and cumulative layout shift. So the first thing I would ask if I wasn't a technical person and I was in marketing is, why do I care about these core web vitals? Why is it important to me? Can you help me with that?
Yeah. So the core web vitals are three KPIs which give an indication how the user experiences a website. So you have all the technical metrics, uh, but in the end, an end user does not care about your TCP connection time or if time to first byte was fast. They care about how fast can I actually see the, the most important thing on the website. And that is typically, for example, on e-commerce, the product image. If you don't see the product image, the page is not really useful. If you're looking at a newspaper website, it's the main image of the article. So that's visual performance. How fast do you see something? And that's the largest contentful page. The second part is if you interact with the website, you click on a button, you scroll. How does the website feel from a while you're interacting with it? So that's pure client side. So then we're looking at first input delay. Um, so that's typically looking at JavaScript performance. And then you have the third one, and I think that's really a key one, that's cumulative layout shift. That gives you an idea on how smooth or how stable the page loads. Yes, you can have a very fast, you can see the hero image very quickly, but if you first see it in the top of the screen, next at the bottom, and then everything moves around, while the ads are loading, while the fonts appear, then that does not give you a good, relaxing feeling. And cumulative layout shift is a KPI which quantifies how stable the page was while initially loading. And a score of 0 is their best. And as soon as it goes up, the user experience degrades drastically.
Where did these metrics originate from? Give me some context around that.
Yeah. So Google introduced the Core Web Vitals, these three metrics, I think now in May 2020, so almost 2 years ago now. So they came up with these metrics, and so far I was actually happy that they introduced those metrics because, for example, cumulative layout shift, there was no means to grab that. You could visually see it, but you could not measure it, for example, in real user monitoring. Um, First input delay is already a little bit older, so that was an existing one. And then largest contentful paint was also new and introduced because all the metrics so far, like first contentful paint, although in my view they're also important, they did not tell you if you could actually use the website correctly. First Contentful Paint could have been you see the logo of your website, but that's good. You need to show that logo as soon as possible, but it didn't give you a good feeling on the actual loading. There was a metric called speed index, which was used in synthetic monitoring, which already helped, which is, in my view, very similar to largest contentful paint. That worked in synthetic monitoring, but did not work in RUM. So with the introduction of largest contentful paint and cumulative layout shift, the Google team or the whole Chromium team around that introduced two new metrics to give a better KPI for end user experience. So that's
Okay, so it sounds to me like, again, if I'm coming from that marketing person who is looking at these metrics for the first time, figuring out why they're important, these metrics seem to tell me like how the users experience your site, not just the cold hard numbers of, like you said, okay, your site takes 2 seconds to load, great. But the experience of that 2 seconds, or as you're clicking around on that screen, these metrics will tell you how the user kind of feels about your site from a performance perspective. Is that an accurate way to state that?
I would say yes, Scott. That's perfect.
So let's get back to the CLS, the cumulative layout shift. Why is that specific? What would be the best? You said 0 is the best score, but what is an acceptable score? And generally, how do you get there to achieve that good score?
Yeah, great question. In my view, the only acceptable score is 0.
Okay.
This is different than all other metrics we typically as engineers look at. Time to first byte. If you go from 192 to 189, you make it 3 milliseconds faster. Will the user notice it? No. So that's now from a CLS perspective, it's perfectly possible to have a 0, to have no layout shifts at all. So it's not difficult to get there. You don't need to buy new hardware. You don't need to buy additional services. So from that perspective, 0 is also a perfect score. In my view, every shift you see as an end user is annoying. It gives the impression that your page loads slower. It distracts the user. So although Google accepts from the Core Web Vitals to be in the green zone, you have a 0 to 0.1 score. In my view, if you're at 0.1, you really see things shifting around. And a shift can be, for example, typically you're looking at a website and you start reading, and then suddenly the banner at the top enters, and that banner takes a bit more space than the developer anticipated, and your whole text drops. So that's not good. Another option is, for example, if you scroll from one page to the other, if you have like centered layouts, sometimes you see like it's when the page loads, it loads without a scroll bar, so it's nicely centered, and then suddenly more content arrives, and then the browser needs to shift the page like with five pixels. Now those 5 pixels result in a very tiny shift, but you still see it, you feel it. It degrades the end user experience. So from that perspective, in my view, we should, if possible, aim for 0. In the end, it's a perfect score. It's not like Utopia, like you can't have 0 seconds time to first byte, you can't have 0 milliseconds DNS. It's like impossible. But from a CLS perspective, it's perfectly possible to have a score of 0. So that's at least my aim. And I know most of the companies who start looking at CLS, once they get there, and although they reach that the Google 75 good percentile good rating, they will still, because sometimes it's actually just a matter of changing one CSS rule or adding a width and a height on a simple element to get rid of these annoying shifts.
Interesting. So I want to talk about one other metric here, and this is one that you've come up with, and I'm going to share this page. Has a little bit different looking U, but it's got the frustration index, and this is something that you came up with, correct?
Correct.
And tell me about this frustration index, how you came up with it, and what it's trying to do.
Yeah. What when I came to this idea, I think now almost 2 or 3 years ago, I can't remember. But when each time when we were improving the performance of our customers' websites, what normally you expect, oh, if you improve a metric, a KPI, time to first bar, largest contentful paint, whatever. If you improve it, then your business it should be better for the user experience. When you improve something, it should be better. And sometimes we saw that that's actually not the case. And then I came up like, why is it actually possible? And frustration index, in the end, a user doesn't like to wait, and everybody knows that. But when the page loads, you have a few steps, and frustration index counts the looks doesn't look at individual metrics themselves, but looks at the difference between a few key um, breakpoints. When is the first time that the user sees something? So when I click on the link, how long does it take to see something? If that step takes too long, then frustration builds up. Once I see something, I have like, oh, cool, I spot something, the logo. If that's super fast, but next you have to wait again too long before you can start consuming, your frustration will again build up. And so frustration index, it's perfect. For a nice example is skeletons. These skeleton websites where you visit a website and you see a lot of gray placeholders. Typically, they have a very fast first page. You see something instantly on the page almost. And so from that perspective, great user experience. However, why do users don't like it? Because they instantly see something, so they're happy, but next, the amount of time they need to wait before actually consuming the content becomes bigger. So from a frustration perspective, it's actually sometimes better to make your first paint 200 or 300 milliseconds slower, so that the next step does not take that long. So that's basically, instead of looking at individual metrics, we look at the difference between them, because that's what the user sees, and that's where frustration builds up. And the longer the time, the more frustration. And that's basically the frustration index.
So if you want to get on the good scores that we were talking about that you want, and obviously Google is basically rewarding people who have better scores with better search results. So they categorize performance as very important. What are some tools or products or things that somebody can do to see what their score is and improve their score by monitoring it or analyzing their site today? What would you recommend? What do you use?
Yeah. So I use a few things. So I use both synthetic tools when they're testing under lab conditions, and I also use real user monitoring. So the first thing I always do when I analyze a website is basically going to Page Speed Insights, which is from Google, where you can add a URL, and it will tell you for that page how it will give you the cumulative layout shift, first input delay, and largest contentful paint. So that's the first thing. It will also come up with some recommendations what you can do to improve them. So that's typically, if you're very new to it, it's like the first step to know how you are. So that's the first thing. The second thing is then doing synthetic tests. For example, how does it behave from different locations around the globe? And so, for example, on my website, my server is in Germany. When somebody from Germany visits the website, they have a different experience than when somebody is from Australia. So you can anticipate with that. But in my view, that's good to get rid of the obvious things. The problem is the web. You have many browsers, many conditions, many different pages, many different content, being in cache, not in cache, ad blockers present. So there's so many different variations, and the user experience can really change on that. So I use Run on a daily basis, so real user monitoring, um, to see, are there certain, for example, page groups. The home, typically everybody has a perfect homepage because that's what they test most. but what about the product detail pages? What about the search page? What about the more special cases, maybe also the long tail content? So my advice is PageSpeed Insights, and then, for example, web page tests, which is also free to use to do some tests around the globe, and then combine that with real user monitoring to really see how the website behaves under real world conditions and not just under the fake lab conditions.
Awesome advice. So if you're out there and you're watching this, I would definitely recommend exactly what you said. And I'm familiar with web page test as well. I use that all the time. Just did an episode on how I measured that for my own site. And I'm going to be using these Google Insights as well on smcjournal.com, because I think it's really important that if I'm going to put a podcast out about these metrics, I should have some good metrics too. So I'm going to be following your advice myself. So thank you so much for being on the show today. Is there anything else, if people wanted to reach you or ask you additional questions after the show, how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm happy to get in touch with everybody. So I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to send me an invite. Just search for Tim Verreke or Verreke. And the same on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @TimVerreke. And feel free to follow me and get in touch.
Awesome. And we'll share these links on the show notes as well for everything that we've shown or what you've talked about as well. So thanks again for being on the show today.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me. It was great talking to you.
Great conversation with Tim. So let's go a little bit further and do this frustration index, because now I'm like, I got to do this for my site. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to webpagetest.org, which, by the way, just had a facelift on the front page of their site. And guys, great job, Catchpoint, for doing this. I'm going to put in now. You can actually do Core Web Vitals from here. Do a Lighthouse audit, visual comparison, trace route. There's lots of cool things you can do. smcjournal.com. Let's just go ahead and run this test, a simple test. This will go through 3 test runs for the site so that it can get sort of a median on your scores and different things. So we'll let this run, and it's running as an emulated Motorola G Gen 4 4G because this is running on a mobile device. This actual site is. So we've got our performance summary report, and it's lower than it would be, and we see these Google Core Vital metrics already here, which is good that we can already see that, and we can dive down into each one of these runs. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to copy this URL, which is just out of frame for you, and we're going to go to the frustration index that Tim put together, frustrationindex.com, and we're going to paste the output URL that we got from Web Page Test. So I'm not putting in smcjournal.com here, putting in that output. So it analyzes that, and I have fairly good scores on Web Page Test, but we can see these frustration index scores here, and let's just call it 23 for the median. And if we look through here, we've got some detailed results, but at the bottom, he tells you the score ranges. And so I am sitting for a 4G mobile device, I'm sitting at the high frustration level mark, which doesn't make me feel good. But most of the people who view this site, smcjournal.com, most of them are on desktops, at least right now. But it doesn't mean we don't want to make it perform well for mobile. It's just that I've already showed you in a previous episode that we do get a little bit lower score, and it's mainly due to the format of our images, which we're in the process of changing, and it will improve. So this is stuff that I would look at and say, well, how can I improve our site for mobile? I don't like the 23. I'm just into the high frustration. If I can just back it off a few more points, I'm in the low frustration, and that's good for me. So I thought that was really cool to see that how he came up with the frustration index and score. And I'll share the links that you can dive into yourself and read more about how he came up with it and the problems that it solves I thought that was really good. And I'll share a couple of other articles, including one from Forbes on why your business should care about these Core Web Vitals as well. Tim also mentioned that he uses synthetic monitoring as well as real user monitoring, or RUM, as he mentioned. Those are going to be shows that we talk about those subjects specifically. We've kind of out of time for this one, but I thought it was important to let you know what these Core Web Vitals were, because they're being talked about quite a bit these days, and in relation to not only performance engineering itself, but SEO. So I hope you enjoyed it. What did you think about this? What's your feedback? Do you use Core Web Vitals as a metric for performance for your site? Let me know. You can reach me at scottmoore.consulting. There is a link there to my LinkedIn profile as well as my Twitter handle. And you can always reach me at help@scottmoore.consulting. I'd really like to thank our sponsors for this episode, which include my friends at Micro Focus, the makers of LoadRunner Professional Enterprise and Cloud. Did you know that LoadRunner Solutions have the largest community of practitioners? You can join that community. There's a URL that we share on every one of our show notes for that, and you should definitely check it out. Our other sponsor for this episode is Keysight Technologies, and they are the makers of Eggplant Performance. So when you hear Keysight, think of the company. When you think of Eggplant, think of the product. So Eggplant has a functional testing solution that is an engine for DAI, as well as Eggplant Performance, that goes hand in hand, and you can buy those two as a bundle. The DAI will include 500 virtual users of Eggplant Performance, and we've got a link to Eggplant Performance on our show notes as well. So, love to hear your feedback about this show as well as others. Have you subscribed to the YouTube channel yet? That's really important. If you haven't, make sure that you subscribe, like the videos that you like, leave me some comments, let me know, and let's just keep the conversation going. Always love to hear from people. It's great to hear some of the comments that I've had. Well, all of the comments really have been great and very positive, and all my friends who are talking to me on LinkedIn and other places. It's just great. I'm really happy that we're doing this, and I'm really happy that we're fully sponsored now for the entire year, which means that their companies see this as a value add for the performance community, because they know that we have this audience. Scott Moore Consulting has this audience of the performance community. We have your ear for whatever reason, and I really appreciate it, and I'm thankful for that every day. We'll continue doing this. Like I said, we're sponsored for the whole rest of the year, so you're going to be seeing my face out there quite a bit talking about performance every chance I get. This show's released every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time in the United States, and of course we'll be posting in case you missed it type episodes. And don't forget, I have the other show as well, the Performance Tour, that comes out every month, and that'll be coming out as well pretty soon, episode 2 for the year 2022. So a lot of stuff going on, and people have said, hey Scott, you haven't even talked about performance testing tools in depth yet. What's new with this vendor? We're going to get there, I promise. Believe me, there's plenty of time to talk about performance testing tools and the vendors involved. But these are things that affect all of us. We all have the same problems, and I just think it should be highlighted here. It's about performance engineering, not just necessarily about the testing. So, till the next podcast, this is Scott Moore signing off for the SMC Journal. Thank you for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.